Okay, so today I'm going to show you how I made this scene in Blender after some questions that I got on the Reddit thread. That's probably why you are here, so stick around. Now, I'm not going to make this from scratch. Instead, I'll show you the steps and give you a quick recap of the main features to make this scene. Now, I'm going to start by showing you how to make the plane. Uh, Since it's already been done on the near plane, I'm going to use the far plane. First of all, we gotta make the basic texture, or in this case, download the basic texture. Now I used a plugin called Blender Kit, went to Materials, searched for sand, and voila, here it is. You just have to click it and it will apply it automatically. Now, the second part is to make the displacement itself, because we don't just have uh, sand or the sand displacement, we also have a more mountainous displacement. And we did this by combining the displacement of the sand together with the desert height displacement that I've got from this tutorial. We then mixed these two together with a mix RGB node to get this result. We plugged that into a displacement node, which went to the displacement in the material output, which in rendered mode gives us this. Then I just duplicated it and put the second one here. So that's the first part. Now, here we will run into a problem, because if I take oh, because if I take this plane and apply a particle system and I choose here, I'm just gonna put it at 200 to make it a bit faster, and we render the collection that I used for the other plane, which is the rocks particles, and it's just a few rocks that I made low poly in and moved them into a collection called rocks particles, and that's the one I chose right now. First of all, the rotation is a bit off, so we're going to go to advanced and enable rotation. Now you can hold down control and use the mouse wheel to scroll through the different options, and yeah, I think global Y looks good. Okay, great. But the thing is, the displacement is only visible when we are in rendered view. So we will have to go there to see the result. And everything looks good until we start to move around and we can see something weird. The rocks do not follow the, the ground. Instead, they follow the flat plane. It might be hard to see, but if we increase the scale and make a larger number, we can see that they are instead floating, which kind of ruins the effect quite by a long shot. And sure, we can place each rock individually, but we want to work smarter, not harder. So to fix this, we are going to have to use a different approach. As I stated, we have we have the mixed displacement map here, and we need to make it into a mesh-based displacement instead. So how do we go about doing that? Well, Blender is good at a lot of things, but in this instance, it isn't that good actually. Thankfully, at least 3 hours of searching and trying to fix this, I came across a plugin called BakeLab. Now, to access this, you will first of all you need to install it. It doesn't come natively inside Blender, so you're gonna have to go to the site. I can link it in the description. But press N, then we will make a new displacement. Using this plugin, it goes from being just a node displacement to a physical displacement. The bad part is that it will use a lot of vertices to get any detail in the displacement. So I subdivided it a lot before baking the texture, and then I first of all cropped part of the mesh away just by going into X-ray mode, selecting the different parts, pressing X and deleting faces. So that was one way to make to delete vertices. The other way is to to select part of the mesh, then go to object data and to make a group. So here I've selected this, then you can make a new group and press assign, and you can name it whatever you want. Then we will go to modifier properties, and we will make a decimate modifier. And in the decimate modifier, we will choose the vertex group that was selected previously. So, for example, the decimate vertex group that I made. So then this modifier will only select that part of the mesh, and then you can unsubdivide it or collapse it to make it more low poly, because from the camera this part is the most important bit. Everything else is more in the background. I could have gone even further actually, but here we are. And I will already show you how to make the basics of it, but if we look from above, we can see that we have a lot more particles around the phone booth, and as we go back we have less and less. And that is with the weight paint mode, where you can choose the density of the particle emitter. This way you can put it in strategic places and save up some resources on the render times. Now for the sky, I first of all used an HDRI, which we can see here. Where's the fog? There is the fog. Turn that off. If I turn the strength up on the... Wait, can I just do this? Yeah, okay. So it's a night sky. It's pointed pretty much straight up at the sky. Now, originally it was like this through the camera. Not really what I was going for. So if you have the Node Wrangler add-on installed, you can just press the HDRI and hit Control Shift T. No, wait, not Control Shift T, Control T, and we'll make this node group. And with this, you can change the rotation to make to put it at an angle that you like. Now I got the HDRI from HDRI Heaven. And then I used what the fuck is this node? I don't remember what it's called. A background node. I guess it comes by default in the world node editor. If it doesn't, you can just add it in. And with that, I put the strength down to a really low value because the standard value is way too bright. Okay, so the next step is to make the sky pop more. The first step was to make a sun lamp. I used these settings, so it's slightly blue with quite a low strength and a bit of an angle, so it isn't too sharp. That just points down at an angle. The next step was to make the fog, which is what makes the biggest difference. Now this isn't. Now this consists of two things. Oh wait, one thing. This doesn't do anything. A volume scatter that you can just add in with a neutral color and a bit of a density. And this value is like how... Don't really know. You can slide it back and forth and see what works for you. Put this volume into the material output volume. And to just make it pop a bit more, I also used a point lamp that is back over here. So there's the camera, and hit back over here is the lamp. Now this also doesn't make a super big difference, but it still makes the horizon a bit brighter, which I liked. So that's it for the sky and the ground. Now for this phone booth, first of all, I modeled it. By reference photos, I recommend a program called PureRef, where you can just download images from any website. Well, you don't even need to download it. You can just drag an image from Google search in here and it will show up. So I had that on my second monitor, and I started modeling. Now imperfections are everything, especially when it comes to a scene like this. So there are corners and what looks like bruises and everything, where it's been dented. And I could have used some beveling now that I think about it. Control B, just to give it a bit of a less sharp look. So I just started building the basic shapes, and when I was happy with that, it was time to make a bit more advanced texturing. So first of all, I'm gonna change back to shader editor, go to from object to world, and plug in this HDRI instead, just to make it a bit more visible. So the first part is to make this glowing telephone part. And to do this, I have two groups on this part of the object. I have the metal and I have the telephone sign group. Now to make the glowing telephone part, I used this node setup. So first of all, I had to make another UV map. Now if you don't know how to make this, I suggest watching Blender Guru's couch tutorial, where he goes into this. I'm not sure the part of the video, but if you don't want to sit through an hour of tutorial footage, then I suggest just search for it online. But that is what we need to use in this case. And this UV map went into this telephone picture that I can show over here. A PNG file that I made in Photoshop to display the text. This text was then... I don't know why I have this actually. We can take that away. Okay, so this picture went into a multiply node, which went into an emission node. Now, the multiply node makes it so this, okay, it's hard to see right now, but this multiply node basically increases the emission strength. Here we're working with black and white color data, and the whitest we can get is, well, white, or for the computer I guess it's 1, but a emission strength of 1 isn't that strong, so we use the multiplied value, so we get, instead of a strength of 1, we get a 46 in this case. So that's how we make this, but it looks way too clean. So we made a glass node in a glass cover in front of it, which makes it look a lot more warm. Now this node group is also pretty simple. We first of all use texture scuffs overlay. I think I got this from CC0 Textures, which is a free asset library, or maybe Polygon, I'm not sure. But there are many different kinds online. You can find one that fits your project. I put it into a mapping node to control the scale of it, so it isn't that big. The next step is to plug this screen overlay first of all into the roughness, and we also want it in the base color to shade part of the glass. Now we also have an ambient occlusion node. Now what this does is it calculates the distance to edges or creases around it, or other objects. So it's pretty hard to see, but if we put it into a color ramp and we bump this up, you can see black and white areas. Black areas are close to other, well, as I said, other meshes or stuff like that. And the white areas are more free from that. And we can change the distance, and we can change the sharpness of it. And we plug this into a mix node as the factor, so it mixes this color that I have right here with this scuffs overlay, and the factor by that it mixes is this color ramp that we made with the ambient occlusion node. So as you can see, this is with only the scuffs texture, and this is with the dirt in the edges. It makes it look more realistic. So that goes into the base color, and then we have the worn effect. Now for the lamp, I tried to make it so that there was a bit of mold going on with it, because if I only used a emission, it looked too flat. So to make this, I also used an ambient occlusion node again, and I made a pretty intense color ramp, so it looked like that. And then I multiplied that value to make more of a bit more of a sharp edge, a more white part of the mesh. Now, as you can see, this is far from perfect, but honestly, it doesn't. It's such a minor part that I felt that it was more than acceptable, instead of all having to make another glass worn cover for the inside of this. And I used the exact same technique with the ambient occlusion in the rest of the phone booth. So here is the most sophisticated texture wall. So the next part is the metal texture. Now to make this, we're first of all gonna have to import texture. I used some metal texture that I found on CCO Textures, and I plugged that into a Principled BDSF. So color into color, roughness into roughness, and a normal map into the normal map. This then went into a shader that mixed this material with this material, which is a more gritty, rusty looking texture. Now to make this texture, I first of all did the same thing. I put the color into the color, I put the metalness into the metalness, the roughness into the roughness. But for the color, I also used the ambient occlusion node again. So it's not super noticeable, but if we look at the difference, especially back here, we can see that it definitely leaves a mark. And it's an easy way to make edges look more old and collected with dust. So that's the base color for this. And once again, you can change the color ramp and the distance to make it suit your needs. So this mixed shader with this material then went into another mixed shader, which was this this uniform color right here. And how to blend these two is made by this factor part, which is controlled by, first of all, another second UV map. It doesn't show up here. Okay, maybe it wasn't needed for this actually. Gonna see here. Can I see it? No. It must have been needed. Okay, so I can go through the basics. First of all, we need to make another UV map, and we will call this leaks. Then we will make sure that that is selected, and we will go to UV. No, wait. Oh my god. Go into edit mode, select the face, and change it to the grunge wall leaks texture. And we will have to make sure to use the right UV map for this one. So we're going to put this node into the vector of this image right here that we can see here, and select the drip. Now, as we can see, if I take this face, we can move this around, and it will show up in the here on the top. And this will also affect all the other parts, so I suggest making these ones really small. So for example, this part right here, or this part right here, if this was over here, it would have shown, and we don't want that. We only want this top part. So make sure that all the other ones are hidden. And this UV map then, this image then goes into the color ramp to make it a bit more noticeable. And this is the factor. So we mixed this color with this texture, and the way we wanted to differentiate between them is by the factor, and the factor is controlled by these two groups. So the white is this one, and the black is this one showing through. So with that, we can see that we have subtle wall leaks. Wait, it's the other way around actually. We can do invert node. Yeah, that looks more correct. Okay, so now I have some gritty looking wall leaks, and you can do this for the other parts of the mesh. Just make sure to use the right UV map, because if I have this one selected and I want to move this, then first of all it doesn't show up. Doesn't it even want to show up? No. Oh wait, is it because I scaled it down? I think it's because I scaled it down. Okay, I don't know. Just make sure to use the right UV map, and in this case it's the drip that I wanted to edit on. I made some low poly screws to make it stand out a bit more, and I didn't want to bother with any UV editing for this. That would have been just horrible. So instead, oh, and also I used the UV maps to make this part of the bottom darker, but we can see it for the glass. Here's the glass node. I got this image that I used texture draw to make darker over here, and that's to make it blend more with the ground, which also have the ambient occlusion node that we can see here. Isn't really that obvious with just the ambient occlusion, but put it through a color ramp, we can see that around where the ground meets the phone booth, it makes it darker, and we just mixed that in with yeah, well, here's the node tree. If try to see more in detail how I made the ground, but the big parts are still the same. So that's another thing that was used for the ground. So the rest of the glass, to make it look the way it does, is actually not that hard. I used Principled BDSF with one in transmission, and I used a surface imperfection map. Again, you can find these online. Just use one that looks good and is suited to the project that you're trying to do. With this, it looks like that. I just plug that into the roughness, and to make, as I said, to make it a bit darker at the bottom, I used the dark bottom glass, put it through a color ramp, and then put that into the base color. Now this part right here, instead of just putting the Principled BDSF into the material output, I used this node setup right here. The reason for this is if I go to world and I change back to the other HDRI and we go to camera view, you can see that it is casting light over here. Now if I only take the principal BDSF, you can see that it's a lot darker. The only thing this node group does is tell, for the calculations, it lets all the rays pass through, but for the camera, it tells it to show the material, and it's a pretty simple node setup that can come very handy for instance project like this, because it makes a big difference going from one to the other. One more thing I can add is for the for stuff like the numpad, I didn't model this from scratch and make all the numbers and all that stuff in Photoshop or something similar. Instead, I just took a numpad from the internet, projected it onto the one plane, and then I started to subdivide and push out the buttons to make them a bit more three-dimensional, because using ambient occlusion in the around the edges and all that would have been really annoying, and it's so far from the camera, so there's not really any reason to make it harder on yourself. For the phone cord, I just made a curve Bezier. Here we have it. Go into edit mode, press 1 G to move it just like any other object. And when you have the basic shape that you like, you can press E to extrude and make it longer. Use this to make it more or less sharp. But when you're happy with the shape, you can go over here and we can go to geometry and do depth to make it more phone cordy. Then we can go out of edit mode, right click and press convert to mesh. So now I have a basic mesh to work with, and then we can just project, then we can just apply a texture to this. That looks phone cordy. Now at this point, the image in Blender is pretty much complete, but there is still another crucial part to make this image, and that is the post-processing. For this I used Photoshop, but free software can get you a really long way. I mean, comparing this, which is straight out of the render, with this, there's a huge difference. Now, to make this, you can choose how hard you want to make it on yourself, but if you want to take an easy way that can get you a really long way, then I suggest the free application called Snapseed for Android and iOS, which is really good. Even if you're not going to use it for any Blender project, you will find uses for it in your life. Now, to make this, I wanted the ground to look less low poly. And the reason it looked a bit too low poly is because we used the plugin that made the displacement from a node based displacement into a mesh displacement, but the mesh count wasn't big enough to preserve all the detail, so I first rendered this image where the ground looked like this, and then after a while I rendered this image where you can really see that the detail is lacking after making the mesh displacement, because it's one of the trade-offs, unfortunately. So to combine these two, I took the ground from the first render, put it on top of the more finished render, and did some color edits on it to make it blend in with the scene more. After Now this is pretty specific to this case, so if you don't know how to mask and everything, that's alright. Hopefully you won't have to use it. The next part is I realized that I shaded this numpad really poorly, so I made this darker in Photoshop as well. After that I added some more grit in Photoshop, as I realized I had missed this pole right here. So I used some funky looking brush and brushed to make more marks in the image. And I also did that for the ground, as texture painting on the ground would have been really annoying when you can make enough of it in post. And as you can see, these things still make quite a bit. The same on the screen, it was just flat green, but just brushed in some strokes. And you can not do it this good of a job in Snapseed, but you can get pretty close by just using a exposure brush or something like that. So now that part is complete. The next step is to make it go from this to this. First of all, I added some soft light. You can also use overlay or anything just to brighten up that part to make it look shine a bit more. Also, similar results can be achieved in Snapseed. The next part is just to make the phone booth bit a bit brighter. For this we used first of all a brightness modifier that was masked to the center of the image or around the phone booth. The next step was to make the edge less visible. As you can see, it's much more sharp right now, because ambient occlusion can get you a long way, but if you don't want to use too much energy on it, then you can, as I said, just fix the minor details in post. And this part is actually really easy to do in Snapseed, which makes a pretty big difference. It makes it blend much better, in my opinion. After that, we brightened the phone booth even more, added a bit more brightness and reduced the contrast. After that, we used a color balance to make the midtones a bit more yellow and a bit more red. The shadows a bit more yellow as well, and the highlights a lot more yellow, a bit more magenta and red. Then I just increased the brightness and contrast by a little bit. Now, how did I get from this to this? Because this single step makes almost the biggest difference of them all. Well, the simple answer is, once again, Snapseed. Usually on bigger screens and monitors, this looks good, and after staring for so long, you don't want too much of the colors to pop excessively. So at this point, I was feeling happy and satisfied with the result. Then I exported it and downloaded it on my phone, and it looked a lot more lackluster. So so once again I wasn't happy with it. So I went into so I loaded it up into Snapseed and did the final part of the process over there. And that's pretty much all for this project. I really appreciated all the kind feedback I got from you guys, and I hope you got something out of this very short tutorial as well. If you have any more questions, just put it in the comments and I will do my best to explain it. and good luck in your future creations.